Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much uh, for joining me and everyone and Tibetan Buddhist Society of Canberra's regular Sunday morning Dharma talk. Today we will have a Dharma talk instead of meditation. So the topic of today's talk is Ananda in Buddha's life. So it's a story about Ananda, and these are fairly correct stories, nothing mystical but really factual. Often in Tibetan Buddhists talk about the lineage gurus of their own tradition and some of the very obscure figures of what they call Nalanda traditions. Some of the Indian teachers have their name on some books, but very little informations on their teachers, on the life and relationship of themselves with others. Unlike these, the life of the Buddha and all the people that played very significant role are very clearly documented in Buddhist scriptures, not just in Pali, but also in Tibetan Buddhist canon. Of course, same goes in Chinese Buddhist canon and anyone else. So therefore, there's quite a lot of historical data, information. Of course, there's some slight disagreement with various sources, but most of them, all in all, have overall, stories are completely identical, be that in the Pali sources or Tibetan sources. And the reason that Tibetan teachers and lineages do not talk much about that life of the Buddha, other than some mystical things about life of Buddha, but not actually the very people, is because most people haven't read them. And they're all found in a text called Vinaya. Vinaya, we would at least expect to be full of stories. It is. You think that it's all full of codes of ethics, of monastic vows and discipline, even though they are there, but majority of Vinaya is all the stories of various people and who they were, what they did, and so on. So we find very ample information on likes of Ananda. And so today I'm going to survey some of the key points and stories about Ananda. Now, Ananda is one of Buddha's many cousins and more well known as Buddha's attendant. But of course, Ananda is 35 years younger than the Buddha. So Ananda is considered to be more of a younger generation who seem to have great role in the future of the Buddhism after passing away of the Buddha. But during the time of the Buddha, Ananda was merely known as an attendant. And also quite a few interesting stories. First, I would like to go a little bit about what it says in the Buddhist scriptures about Ananda's past life, why he came to be the Ananda. According to those texts, in one of the previous lives, Ananda made an aspiration to become Buddha's attendant. So he made a prayer. And he made this prayer in the time of a previous Buddha called Padumuttara, and many, many eons before the present eon. And at that time he met the attendant of Padumuttara Buddha, and he really admired to be like him in his future lives. So after having done many good deeds, and he made his resolution known to the Buddha Padumuttara, who confirmed that his wish will come true in a future life. So therefore, after having been born and reborn throughout many lifetimes and doing many good deeds, he was born as one of the Buddha's cousin. So Ananda's father's name is Amritodana. Amritodana is one of the younger brothers of the Buddha's father, Shuddhodana, and Amritodana is also father of Devadatta, the notorious cousin of the Buddha. Some people think they are brothers. Definitely Ananda was slightly younger. It may be either by the same mother or by a second mother, we do not know. Anyway, so Ananda was a younger son of Amritodana, and that's how he's a cousin to Buddha. And his elder brother Devadatta, of course, became one of the early Shakya youths to become ordained and follower of Buddha. But he's more for sort of well known for his as a traitor or as a rival of the Buddha. That things went very bad in his later in his life. Even though it seems in the early time Devadatta was a very keen disciple and became achieved quite a few feats and so on, but he wanted to compete the Buddha, so things didn't go very well there. Whereas Ananda's story is quite different. Ananda and Buddha's son Rahula was born in the same night, the full moon, on which Buddha attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. So that's a very significant story. And they also said the name Ananda means joyful, was that the night that he was born was the night they were all became joyful because they heard the Buddha has attained enlightenment. So all the Shakyas became very delighted to hear the Buddha's enlightenment, and Buddha's enlightenment was coincided with a full lunar kind of eclipse, and Rahula was named after the lunar eclipse, and Ananda was named after the joy that they all had after the lunar eclipse by having seen the birth of Buddha's son Rahula and also Ananda. Now most people can't fathom why did you would think, we thought the Buddha's son Rahula was already born when he left, but that's only one version of the story. According to Mahayana Buddhist text, Vinaya text, it says the Rahula remained 6 years in his mother's womb, Yashodhara, for among many number of reasons why that is so that Yashodhara, who's Buddha's wife, will not commit suicide or do anything silly because of her loss of husband, but she will always remain hopeful to give birth to her child. And of course, she had created specific karma in the past to having to carry the baby for 6 years. Now, most people can't imagine this, but that's exactly. There are many unimaginable things have actually happened in the story of in the life of the Buddha, and that's one of them. So anyway, that's so coming back to the story of Ananda. Ananda being born on that night, and so Ananda is said to have been also ordained later on, only after Shakyamuni Buddha returned. So he must be fairly maybe because it says Amritodana, the father, has somewhat dissuaded from his younger son Ananda being being ordained as his eldest son because he wanted to sort of keep away from his both sons becoming ordained. So it looks like Ananda was not ordained until in his early maybe 20, year of the age 20. And when he was ordained, he was largely under the care of a monk called Punna Maniputta, who, according to the sources, was a nephew of Kodanya. Kodanya is one of the 5 mendicants, the senior one who achieved the first stream entry and arhathood. Anyway, so Mantaniputra was a disciple of Kodanya, and of course Kodanya is disciple of the Buddha. And so Ananda recalls how he met Punna, how he met Punna, who encouraged him with the following. He says, "It is by clinging, Ananda, that I am occurs, not without clinging. And by clinging to what does I am occur. It is by clinging to forms and feelings, perceptions, inclinations, and consciousness that I am occurs, not without clinging. Suppose a vain young person would examine his face in a mirror or a bowl filled with pure, clean water, he would look at it with clinging, not without clinging. Likewise, by clinging to form, feeling, perception, inclination, consciousness, does I am occurs, not without clinging." So this kind of profound teaching on how clinging to self occurs, discourse given by Punna to Ananda, made Ananda to really have turned to the Dharma in an amazing way. By the way, the very mention about the beautiful face is said that because Ananda was a very attractive young man. He was very, very attractive young man, and the likelihood of him staying monk was not that great because everybody admired him so much physically. So it is said. In any case, now Ananda's life has become very, very important in early Buddhist history. Ananda later on, after 20 years, in Buddha's ministry, Ananda became then later on the attendant of the Buddha. Because before that, Buddha had attendant, but nobody was permanent attendant. So when Buddha was turning like 53, then one day he asked whether anybody could. He actually said he needed a permanent attendant, and Ananda performed his duties with great devotion and care, and he acted as an intermediary between Buddha and his disciples, lay people, as well as the Sangha. And Ananda always accompanied the Buddha for the rest of his life until Buddha passed away, acting not only as an assistant, but also you can see as a secretary or a mouthpiece or whatever. Ananda is also played very significant role later in forming the Buddhist council after Buddha passed away, as well as ordination of women in Buddhist as bhikshunis, particularly great insistence from Buddha's stepmother Prajapati Gautami and Yashodhara. So Ananda he features everywhere. Ananda also accompanied the Buddha during the last year of Buddha's life, and also he suffered a huge number of charges, the big mistakes he committed, and therefore it also delayed his attainment of arhathood. So he remained as unenlightened, so to speak, throughout his whole life until a couple of months after Buddha passed away. So therefore, Ananda's life has been quite a mixture of many stories. Ananda was very much an inseparable attendant of the Buddha, and almost Ananda. It is said that Ananda has heard all the teachings. But remember, when the Buddha got enlightenment, that was 35. Then he started teaching straight away, and then Ananda didn't become a monk until 20 years later, and because he was already born when Buddha was 35. So there will be at least 20 years of a first ministry of Buddha's teaching. Ananda wasn't there. So we can't really say that Ananda heard everything, but he didn't hear the first 20 years of teaching. But nevertheless, Ananda became most important in the first Buddhist first council that was held. So let me go over some of the interesting stories of Ananda. Now, the Ananda is not only Buddha's cousin, but also he was a brother of Devadatta. Devadatta had already become a kind of traitor somewhat. He was so jealous of his cousin, the Buddha, and he befriended the king Ajatasattu and poisoned him and poisoned his mind, and so to speak, and then made him to kill his father Bimbisara. And Devadatta was himself interested, wanting to kill the Buddha. He actually hired assassins. So that was the brother. So Buddha had very difficult family members in his ministry. Devadatta as his rival, and so on. So we hear that Ananda was anyway ordained, and after 20 years, Buddha's ministry has started, and so that means the whole Buddhist ministry was already 20 years old. So there were many teachings that was taught prior to Ananda's coming. So we have to assume there were many other discourses the Buddha gave that Ananda did not hear. But yet we actually say that Ananda heard everything, but he could not have heard everything, because Ananda only met Buddha when Buddha was age of 53. Anyway, that's really not important. And Ananda, when Ananda did become ordained, his father truly supported him, and therefore it became a very big event. So Ananda's first teacher, as I mentioned, is Punna Mantaniputra, and Punna's teaching, one I quoted, led Ananda to attain many understandings and realizations. But remember, Ananda's actual attainment of arhathood did not happen until later on. Ananda also was raised greatly by Shariputra, because Shariputra taught Ananda many finer points of Buddhist teachings, and these two were always sharing things, habit of sharing things with one another. And so the relationship between Ananda and Shariputra was considered to be very good. It is said that Ananda. It is said that yeah. So when Ananda becoming now, in the first 20 years of Buddhist ministry, Buddha had several other attendants, before Ananda came along. But however, when Buddha was already age 55, he announced that he was in need of a permanent attendant, as I mentioned. And then Buddha had been feeling slightly old, and his previous attendant had not done a job that was really good enough, because nobody stayed permanently. Initially, several of the Buddha's foremost disciples responded to his request, but the Buddha did not accept them. And all the while, Ananda remained quiet. He didn't say yes or no. When he was asked why, he said the Buddha would know best whom to choose. Upon which then the Buddha responded by choosing Ananda. So Buddha himself chose Ananda. Ananda agreed to take on the position on the condition that he did not receive any material benefit from the Buddha, and then accepting such benefit would open him to criticism, so that he chose to the position because of people might think he has some ulterior motives. He doesn't. He also requested the Buddha to allow him to accept invitation on his behalf, allow him to speak, ask questions about his doctrine, and repeat any teaching that the Buddha had taught in Ananda's absence, because Ananda was really, if you taught something when I'm not there, please can you repeat the teachings to me, because in those days they can't record and play back. So these requests would help people trust Ananda and show the Buddha was sympathetic to his attendant. Anyway, Ananda considered Ananda considered this as a real advantage of being an attendant, which is then why he requested them to the Buddha. He made these conditions that to if he were to serve as attendant, and then these conditions should be met. It is said the Buddha agreed to Ananda's conditions, and therefore Ananda became his attendant, and therefore accompanying the Buddha on most places where the Buddha went. Ananda took care of the Buddha on daily practical needs of the Buddha by doing such things as bringing water, cleaning the Buddha's dwelling place, and he's very, very observant and devoted, even almost watch and protect the night time where Buddha was dwelling. Ananda takes often the role of an interlocutor of many of the recorded dialogues. He tended to Buddhas for complete 25 years, a duty which entailed so many work. His relationship with the Buddha is depicted as warm and trusting. When the Buddha grew ill, Ananda had a sympathetic illness. When the Buddha grew older, Ananda kept taking care of him with even more great devotion. So Ananda sometimes literally risked his own life for his teacher and his uncle Buddha. At one time, it is said that his own brother, Devadatta, tried to kill the Buddha by having a drunk a wild elephant released in front of Buddha. Ananda stepped in front of Buddha to protect him. When the Buddha told him to move, he refused, although normally he always obeyed the Buddha. Through a supernatural accomplishment, the Buddha then moved Ananda aside and subdued the elephant by touching and speaking to it with loving kindness. Ananda often acted as an intermediary and secretary, as before, and passing on the messages from the Buddha and informing Buddha of the news and invitations or the needs of the lay people, or advising the lay people who wanted to provide gifts to the Sangha. So that's how he became everybody has to see him before seeing the Buddha. So therefore, Mahaprajapati Gautami, which is Buddha's stepmother or foster mother, requested to offer robes for personal use for the Buddha. She said that even though she had raised the Buddha in her youth, she never gave anything in person to the young prince. She now wished to do herself. The Buddha initially insisted that she give the robe to the community, as a whole rather than to be attached to him, his person. However, Ananda interceded and mediated, suggesting that the Buddha had better accept the robe. He said, you really should accept the robe directly from Prajapati Gautami. Eventually, the Buddha did, but not without pointing out to Ananda that good deeds like giving should always be done for the sake of action itself, not for the sake of the person. So this is very important teaching. And the sutras say that the Buddha sometimes asked Ananda to substitute for him as teacher, because sometimes Buddha would send Ananda to teach, and was often praised by the Buddha for Ananda's great teachings. So Ananda was often given important teaching roles, such as regularly teaching the Queen Mallika and Queen Samavati and other people in the ruling class. Because Ananda was such a lovely attendant and very good looking, he was very popular, particularly to the queens and the royal families. Once Ananda taught a number of King Udena's concubines. They were so impressed by Ananda's teaching that they gave him 500 robes, which Ananda accepted. Having heard about this, King Udena criticized Ananda for being greedy. Ananda responded by explaining how every single robe was carefully used, reused, and recycled by many monastic community, prompting the king to offer another 500 robes. Ananda also had a role in the Buddha's visit to Vaishali. In the story, Buddha taught the well-known text called Ratnakuta Sutra to Ananda, which Ananda then recited in Vaishali, and curing all the epidemic diseases that plagued the city, drought and evil spirits. So another well-known passage in which the Buddha taught Ananda is passage of the spiritual friendship called Kalyanamitta. In that passage, Ananda stated his spiritual friendship is half of his holy life. The Buddha corrected Ananda, stating that such friendship is entire holy life. So Ananda worked as a very, very important person. But Ananda had, due to his attractive body and youthful situation, Ananda had very many temptations. It is said that there was one nun called Bhikkhuni. She became so enamored with Ananda and pretended to be ill to have Ananda visit her. When she realized the error in her ways, she confessed her mistakes to Ananda. Other accounts also tell the lower caste woman called Prakriti fell in love with Ananda and persuaded her mother Matangi to use a black magic to enchant him. This succeeded, and Ananda was lured into her house, but came to his senses and called upon the help of the Buddha. Buddha then taught Prakriti is the woman, to reflect on the repulsive nature of human body. So this is how, when I was thinking, these days they think that monks are taught to meditate on the repulsive looking body of women. But actually Buddha taught the repulsive looking of men to the girl, because so it's actually the other way around, because the lady was so attracted to Ananda. Buddha had to give her the teaching that men's body is even more repulsive looking, on top of the women's, of course. Anyway, Buddha then continued teaching Ananda and other listeners about the same subject, and so on. So anyway, Ananda had many suitors, many people really following him, wanting him, but he succeeded to avoid any of the temptations. Not only that, Ananda's role in having the woman being ordained is very significant. In the role of a mediator between the Buddha and lay communities, Ananda sometimes made suggestion to the Buddha for amendment or change in the monastic discipline. Most importantly, early texts attribute the inclusion of women in the early Sangha to Ananda. 15 years after the Buddha's enlightenment, the Buddha's foster mother, Ma Prajapati Gautami, came to see him to ask him to be ordained as the first bhikkhuni. Initially, the Buddha refused this. After 5 years, Prajapati Gautami came to request the Buddha again, this time with the following of other 500 Shakya women, including Buddha's former wife Yashodhara. These 500 women has walked 310 kilometers. When they arrived in Vaishali, they looked dirty, tired, and depressed. And Ananda felt very pity for them. Ananda therefore confirmed with the Buddha whether women could become enlightened as well. Although Buddha conceded this, he did not allow the Shakya women to be ordained yet. Ananda then discussed with the Buddha how Prajapati Gautami, the Buddha's his own foster mother, took great care of him when he was young, after the death of his actual mother Mayadevi. Ananda then mentioned that previous Buddhas had also ordained bhikshunis. In the end, the Buddha allowed the Shakya women to be ordained, being the start of bhikshuni order. As Ananda had Prajapati Gautami ordained by her acceptance of the set of rules set by the Buddha. This came to be known as the Guru Dhammas, the Guru Dhamma. These are the sort of very, very controversial kind of conditions that they describe the subordinate relation of a bhikshuni community to that of the bhikshus, and so there are many other rules were set out. Many people interpret this account to mean the Buddha was reluctant in allowing women to be ordained, that Ananda successfully persuaded the Buddha to change his mind. Well, it looked like that on the surface, but I think Buddha was mainly examining the people's motivation, whether they're sincere or not. Buddha's initial refusal was just testing people's resolve. It's not that he need to be influenced by Ananda, but Buddha was simply testing the resolve of the woman. And because monastic procedures and the rules are not so easy, and women had to have additional vows and so on. And the Buddha being enlightened and omniscient, of course, he knows exactly what is best. Anyway, so there are many different kind of school of thought whether Ananda's persuasion was which actually got the woman ordained or not. Historically, it looks like, but Buddha was going to teach the Dharma for the benefit of all sentient beings. How could he possibly exclude women? Anyway, acceptance of women in the Buddhist monastic order, Buddha told Ananda that the Buddha's dispensation would last shorter because of these. So that is one of the controversies. Buddha said, because you made me to ordain the woman, the teaching will at least not live long as it should. At that time, Buddhist monastic order consisting of wandering celibate males without many monastic institutions. Allowing women to join Buddhist celibate life might have led to dissension as well as temptation between the sexes. So that's why the Guru Dhamma, the 8 kind of additional rules, however, were meant to fix these problems and prevent the dispensation from being curtailed. So there are some account of setting up of the Bhikshuni order. According to Pali and Sasaka textual tradition, Bhikshuni order was set up 5 years after Buddha's enlightenment. But that seems way too early, because Ananda became an attendant 20 years after. So if Ananda were to play all the roles, it could not have happened that early, So that's why, and also Prajapati Gautami was Buddha's foster mother, and she must have therefore been considered to be very older than of course Ananda. So anyway, Bhikshuni order was established. Prajapati still had many audience with the Buddha, and it is all reported. So Prajapati Gautami was always following the Buddha with teachings. Because of this and other reason, it could be inferred that establishment of the Bhikkhuni order actually took place early in the Buddha's ministry. If this is the case, then Ananda's role in establishing the order becomes less likely. So that is, modern scholars can therefore have good reason to see whether or not Ananda's role was the very significant one that to make ordained women. Because Ananda was also one of the charges out of the many mistakes that he was charged later on was asking the Buddha to ordain women. So maybe that's one justification. Anyway, so so ordination of women definitely has something to do with Ananda. Whether it started when he was there, or whether he made it even stronger the case. And anyway, Ananda's role in founding the Bhikshuni order made him very popular with the whole story of that. So Ananda became very, very instrumental in that. And so then, of course, last thing was about Ananda's and the death of the Buddha, in spite of his long association with Buddha, maybe like 25 years, that Ananda still was not enlightened after being with Buddha. Because of this, fellow monk, ridiculed Ananda. And he's just like a young boy, a little boy, pretty face, but that's parade type of thing. So, however, Buddha reprimanded the other monks, saying that Ananda would certainly be enlightened in this life. So, of course, Buddha wasn't wrong, Buddha foresaw that Ananda will be enlightened. Anyway, so in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, it says that the last year long trip of the Buddha took Ananda from Rajgriha to the small town of Kushinagar before the Buddha died there. So before reaching there, Buddha spent a retreat, the rainy season retreat in Velugama, and that is in Rajgriha, the bamboo grove. And then after getting out of the Vaishali area, and then there was a big famine. And then the 80-year-old Buddha expressed his wish to speak to the Sangha once more. Buddha had grown seriously ill in Vaishali, much to the concern of everyone. Ananda understood that Buddha wished to leave final instructions before his death. Buddha stated, however, that he had already taught everything needed without withholding any secret as a teacher with a closed fist would. He also impressed upon Ananda that he did not think the Sangha should be reliant too much on one leader, not even himself. So this is very important, I think, that because Buddha himself wanted to empower people that teaching is the leader, not the teacher or any individuals. He then continued with the well-known statement to take his teaching as a refuge, as oneself as a refuge, relying upon on any other refuge. Also, after he would be gone. So it is said, moreover, these very beautiful episodes, touching with the nobility and psychological vicissitude with regard to both Ananda and Buddha, seems to go back very far. At the time when the authors, like the other disciples, still considered Blessed One a man, an eminently respectable and undefiled master, to whom behavior and utterly human words were lent, so that one is even tempted to see there the memory of a real scene which Ananda reportedly told the community in the months following the parinirvana, the passing away of the Buddha. So the Ananda did. It is said that Ananda, when the Buddha said he will go to Kushinagar, Ananda make a request, and that was too late. And so when Ananda heard this, he wept. When Buddha said he's going to pass away in Kushinagar, Ananda wept. And Buddha consoled him, however, pointing out to Ananda that had been a great attendant, being sensitive, the needs of different people. If he was earnest in his effort, he would attain enlightenment soon. He then pointed out to Ananda that all the conditioned things are impermanent, all people must die. So in the final kind of days of Buddha's life, Buddha traveled to Kushinagar, and then the Buddha had Ananda to prepare a place for him to lie down between the two sala trees, same type of tree under which the mother of the Buddha gave birth to him. Buddha then had Ananda invite the Malla, the local rulers of Kushinagar, to pay their final respect. Having returned, Ananda asked the Buddha what should be done to his body after his death. He replied that it should be cremated, giving detailed instructions how it should be done. Since the Buddha prohibited Ananda from being involved himself, he said, you should not get involved. Someone else will look after it. But rather had him instruct the Mallas to perform the rituals. These instructions have, by many people, interpreted as prohibition that monastics should not be involved in funerals. I don't know whether that's the case or not. Buddha did not want Ananda to be involved. Let the local people handle the funeral. Anyway, so there are many different theories why that is the case. And then Ananda then continued by asking how devotees should honor the Buddha after his death. Buddha responded by listing 4 important places of life that Buddha people could pay their respect, and which later became the 4 places of the holy Buddhist pilgrimage. When Buddha was asked how to honor him, Buddha told those people who want to think of me, go to the place I was born, where I got enlightened, where I gave teachings, where I pass away, as well as other lesser important places. So before Buddha died, Ananda recommended the Buddha to move to a more meaningful city, but instead of dying here in Kapilavastu. Ananda then asked who will be the teacher after the Buddha would be gone, but the Buddha replied that his teaching and discipline would be the teacher instead. This meant that decisions should be made by reaching consensus within the Sangha, and more generally that how the time had gone, Buddhist monastics and devotees to take the Buddhist texts as authority, and now that the Buddha was dying. So it's very amazing advice is not totally dependent on one successor after Buddha, but always use the teaching as the real leader. Buddha gave several instructions before his death, including the direction that his directive that his former charioteer be shunned by his fellow monks to humble his pride. He even said that because Buddha's attendant was very arrogant for whatever, Buddha said you should shun him so that his pride is remedied. In his final moment, Buddha asked if anyone had any questions they wished to pose him as the final chance to allay any doubts. When no one responded, Ananda expressed joy that all the Buddha's disciples present had attained level beyond Buddha's doubts about the Buddha's teaching. However, the Buddha pointed out to Ananda that Ananda spoke out of faith and not out of meditative insight, the final reproach. Buddha added that of all the 500 monks that are surrounding him, even the latest and the most backward had attained the initial stage of stream enter. Meant as an encouragement, Buddha was referring to Ananda. Everybody but has attained enlightenment but you. During Buddha's final nirvana, Aniruddha, one of Buddha's cousin, was able to use his meditative power to understand what stages Buddha underwent through before attaining final nirvana. However, Ananda was unable to do that, indicating his lesser spirituality. So, therefore, after the Buddha's death, Ananda recited several verses expressing sense of urgency, deeply moved by the events and their bearing. Terrible was quaking, men's hair stood on end when the all-accomplished Buddha passed away. Anyway, shortly after the council, Ananda brought the message with regard to Buddha's directive and to Channa personally. Channa was humbled and changed his ways and also attained enlightenment, and the penalty was withdrawn by the Sangha. So Ananda then traveled to Shravasti, where he was met with the sad populace, where he consoled with the teachings on impermanence. After that, Ananda went to quarters of the Buddha, went through all the motions of the routine formerly performed when the Buddha was alive, such as preparing water, cleaning the quarters. He then saluted and talked to the quarters as though Buddha was still there. So Ananda was really respectful. Anyway, so subsequent to Buddha's passing away, there was held a Buddhist council. So Buddhist council was held in Rajgriha, and that is the first rainy season retreat after Buddha passed away. And then the presiding monk was Mahakashapa. Mahakashapa called Ananda to recite the discourses he has heard as a representative on his council. There was a rule issued by the only enlightened disciples were allowed to attend the council to prevent the mental affliction from clouding the disciples' memories. Ananda had, however, not attained enlightenment yet, in contrast with the rest of the council, consisting 499 arahants. Mahakashapa therefore did not allow Ananda to attend yet, although he knew that Ananda's presence in the council was required. He did not want to be biased by allowing an exception to the rule. So anyway, Ananda felt very humiliated, but was prompted to focus on his efforts to reach enlightenment before the council started. So text adds that Ananda felt very motivated when he remembered the Buddha's words that he should be his own refuge, and he was consoled and advised by Anuruddha and Vajraputra, later being his own attendant. Vajraputra was Ananda's attendant. On the night before the event, he tried and hard to attain enlightenment. After a while, Ananda took a break and decided to lie down for the rest. He then attained enlightenment right then, halfway between standing and lying down. Ananda was known as the disciple who attained awakening in none of the four traditional poses: walking, standing, sitting, or lying down. Ananda was in between. The next morning, to prove his enlightenment, Ananda performed supernatural accomplishment by diving into the earth and appearing on his seat at the council. So anyway, Ananda, the account of Ananda enlightenment happened just before the Buddhist council. So Ananda struggled on the evening before the council, still told among Buddhists as a piece of advice in the practice of meditation, never give up and not to interpret the practice too rigidly. So in any case, later on, after his attainment of enlightenment, then Ananda was asked to read all the sutras, so starting with thus I have heard, and then Ananda, with immaculate memory, told all the teachings. So he became like the exponent of all the teaching. Even though successor of the Buddhism at that time became Mahakashyapa, but Mahakashyapa's successor were to become Ananda. But Ananda was charged for many mistakes. During the council, Ananda was charged for an offense by members of the Sangha for having enabled women to join the monastic order. One. Beside this, he was charged of having forgotten to request the Buddha to specify which offenses of monastic discipline could be disregarded, for also having stepped on Buddha's robe, for having allowed women to honor the Buddha's body after his death, which was not properly dressed, during which body was sullied by the tears of the crying woman, and for having failed to ask the Buddha to continue to live on. Ananda did not acknowledge these as offenses, but he conceded to do formal confession anyway. In faith of the opinion of the venerable elder monks, Ananda wanted to prevent disruption in the Sangha. With regard to having women ordained, Ananda answered that he had done this with great effort, because Mahaprajapati Gautami was Buddha's foster mother who had long provided for him. With regard to not requesting Buddha to continue to live, many textual traditions have Ananda respond by saying he was distracted by Mara. So that's why in Buddhist practice, the 7 limb prayers, we always make requests to live long, so that nobody become distracted by Mara like Ananda was. So anyway, Ananda was charged all of these, and the charges were laid after Ananda had become enlightened. So, but the charges were laid, laid in order to that these things are not repeated in the future. And anyway, when Ananda was banned from the council until he did the attaining enlightenment, which means he must have also accepted the charges. Mahakashyapa listed all the 7 charges to counter Ananda's objection. So Ananda's mistakes were regarded to be maybe it was so that Ananda does not play the card that he is Buddha's cousin. He has served as longest attendant. Therefore, but they were trying to humble him as well. Maybe so you can see that. Anyway, Ananda became very, very important. Ananda himself became successor to Mahakashyapa. Then Ananda himself disciple was Shanavasti, and Ananda himself passed away miraculously, and it is said Ananda left amazing relics. Ananda was teaching for whole life. It is said that he lived 120 years. So when Buddha passed away, so that will be just Ananda would be only in his late 50s. So he lived another 70 years, and his duration as the successor of the Buddha was very, very long. Even though Mahakashyapa served as the first successor, the successor to Mahakashyapa became Ananda, and Ananda was teaching till to the end of his life. Ananda was very, very good in giving the teaching and discourses. He his own pupil Shanavasti was very much impressed by Ananda. And when Ananda was about to die, he decided to spend his final moments in Vaishali. And then he traveled to the river Rohini. And it says that before reaching the river, he met the seer called Madhyantika and 500 of his followers, who he converted Buddhism. Some sources say that Ananda passed the message to him. When Ananda was crossing the river, he was followed by the king Ajatasattu, who wanted to witness Ananda's death, was interested too in his remains as relics. Ananda had once promised to King Ajatasattu that he would let him know when he would die, and accordingly Ananda had informed him. On the other side of the river, however, a group of Litsavi from Vaishali awaited him for the same reason, because everybody is very interested to the remains or the relics. There were all two parties interested, one on this side of the river, another on that side of the rivers. One is the Shakyas, other is Kolyans. Ananda realized that his death death on either side of the river could anger one of the two parties involved. Through a supernatural accomplishment, he therefore surged into the air to levitate and meditate in mid-air, making his body naturally go up in flames, and with his relics landing on both sides of the river, and or something else splitting into 4 parts or 2 parts. And anyway, Ananda had pleased all the parties involved, so that they all got their share of the relics. So that river is considered. It's said that when Chinese and pilgrims visited in the 4th century and 7th century, they actually found those stupas built on both sides of the river, which are regarded to be the stupas built in memory of Ananda. So Ananda is really considered to be very, very important, and he has recruited his own successor Shanavasti, who's the third, because of Ananda was instrumental in helping the establishment of Bhikkhuni ordination. Ananda features as one of the early lineage masters in all the Mahayana schools and Theravadan schools. So therefore, it is very nice to be able to become a little bit familiar with some key important figures in life of the Buddha, because if we are Buddhists, whether we are Tibetan or Japanese or Theravadins or whatever, we should talk more about the Buddha. Sure, we can talk about different lineages, their teachers, or even the Nalanda Panditas, but Nalanda Panditas is all post 3rd century. But Buddhism came 500 BC. So how about the 800 years before the Nalanda Panditas came? So we really need to focus more on going back all the way to the Buddha and his life stories. And these are true stories. These are very, very faithfully recorded in all languages. So they're not just one version better than the other. They're all essentially about 90% of the stories are all identical. So that shows how well kept the stories are, because they are found in Pali canon as well as the Tibetan Buddhist canon, not to mention in Chinese and other languages. So being able to know a little bit about Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and attendant. Not only he became attendant, during his life he was only an attendant. But after Buddha passed away, remember, there's a vacuum, Even though Mahakashyapa was there, but Mahakashyapa didn't live very long. And then Ananda had to step in to become the successor. That is second patriarch of Buddhism is Ananda. And the third is Shanavastin, that's his disciple. Fourth is Upagupta. Upagupta is the one who became teacher or to King Ashoka. And that's how Buddhism was influenced by the likes of Ananda, Shanavasti, and Upagupta and others, before the very amazing luminaries of Nalanda Institute. Nalanda was built later, much later, let alone before all the scholars like Nagarjuna. They only happened in the 2nd century. But Ananda is the 4th century BC. So what happened between those 600 years? Likes of Ananda and Shanavasti and Upagupta and as many as 26 luminaries have held the reign of the Dharma until Nalanda could be built, until Vikramashila could be built in 8th century. And then only later on did they build institutions like Takshila in near Peshawar, as well as all the monasteries and temples in Tibet in 7th century or 8th century, 9th century, and some even not earlier than 14th century, like all the famous Gelugpa monasteries in Ganden and Drepung, and these are very, very late. These are barely, barely 600 years. When they were celebrating 600-year anniversary of the life and teaching of Tsongkhapa a few years ago. Of course, we rejoice that too. But remember, Buddhist history goes 2,600 years. So we do not know the immediate story of the Buddha and all the disciples. Then telling the recent stories and how great our lineage is very very good to know. But it's even better if we know the root, how the root of the Dharma actually came from Buddha and his disciples, and disciples, and even as far as Nagarjuna. And then how the Nagarjuna and his successors all the way kept going in India, and then how it came to Tibet or Mongolia or elsewhere. So it's very good to tell the story, the very source of the river we need to know. Of course, we don't want to sort of forget the early stories or not read them because they're in the Vinaya kind of canon text. It's in there. But therefore, it's very important to become familiar with this. I have become, when I read these kind of stories in the Vinaya text, the Tibetan Buddhist canon, in early 70s in Lumbini, when we got hold of a whole Kangyu, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so happy that I learned to read, and I couldn't close any of the books, read all of them. And as I was meeting all of these great individuals, because the story of their lives are so detailed, you can find. So with this we will conclude here. Thank you very much, everyone. That's all today. Thank you.